Vienna is my hometown, so it's really unusual but great to be in Vienna and talk about something that I'm really passionate about and I really care. I was in a bit of a pickle because we announced a partnership with the United Nations a few months ago, and this is going to go live on October the 1st. And we basically have an existing presentation. You will find that presentation, I think, on the website, Natalia. And this is showing you the status quo. I wanted to give you a sneak peek of what's to come and basically show you what we're excited about in the future. I would like to ask you to keep this in the room if you can, because it's going to be on the wraps for a few more weeks. May I ask who here has heard about OpenWallet? Okay, that's about half the room. So I will bore this half maybe a little bit if I tell some of the fundamentals about OpenWallet, but I hope I have something a little later that you find new and interesting as well. Maybe let's start with what we mean when we talk about digital wallets. Because a lot of people in the industry, when they think about wallets, think about one specific thing. Maybe you care about crypto, right? There is an entire industry of crypto wallets. And this is really typically to store digital assets and value. Maybe you're in the identity space. Maybe you heard yesterday Paulo's keynote about the EUDI wallet, which is basically going to have your identity information and maybe a couple of other credentials as well. But when you think about wallets holistically, there is quite a lot going on, from driver's licenses to ID cards, probably passports in the future, to academic credentials. Your university degree in the future is going to be in a digital wallet. Health-related credentials, NFTs, central bank digital currencies. When you're flying out from Vienna, you will most likely have your boarding pass stored in a digital wallet. So you will have tickets, car keys, room keys, keys to your office, of course, credit and debit cards, Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay. So when you look at that in aggregation, we believe that digital wallets are really critical infrastructure. Getting this right matters. And getting it right on a global basis matters even more because we're really facing significant challenges. There are a lot of standards in this space. Even when you hone in and focus on just one vertical like identity, you are confronted with many different credential standards, with many different standards how to communicate those credentials. Things like ISO MDL and ISO MDoc, or anon creds, or W3C verifiable credentials, or STJOTs. And then maybe you are interested in OpenID for verifiable credentials, or maybe you want to use DITCOM. And even if you are using DITCOM, there are, I lost count, 100 and something DIT methods, I think. So there's really a lot going on. And in terms of cooperation, there isn't that much, certainly not that much on a global scale. And there is not, in our opinion, enough cooperation and conversations between different verticals. So the people in the crypto space, for instance, don't necessarily talk to the people in the identity space. They both worry about holder binding. They both worry about authentication, but they're in their verticals, and a lot of people are not necessarily looking left and right. And the same is true for countries. Who here has heard Paulo speak yesterday about the EUDI wallet? Have you been at the Open Source Congress? Oh, that's just one person. Okay, so but you may know about the two. You may know about the EUDI effort, right? This is the European Digital Identity Wallet. It's a big strategic initiative of the European Commission. The Commission is actually taking 26 million euro and investing that in a open source reference implementation, which is fantastic. Even within Europe, of course, there are member states with slightly different opinions as to where the EUDI project should go. Then you have projects in the United States, for instance, Department of Homeland Security, both the TSA as well as the folks that are responsible for the green card, they have their own ideas. And even within EHS in the United States, you have one faction that is favoring W3C verifiable credentials, and then you have another faction that is favoring MDocs. There is also not that much of cooperation between companies. You have, for instance, Google and Samsung. And when you look at the browser space, the Google Chrome browser and the Samsung Internet browser are based on the same foundation, on the same code foundation, something called Blink, part of the Chromium project. When it comes to wallets, Google and Samsung have a different code base. So there's not necessarily enough cooperation between corporations. And then finally, there is really not enough cooperation in our view between the public sector and the private sector, between the companies on the one hand and the companies on the other hand. And there are on both sides of the aisle, I think, some folks who are really skeptical. There are companies from startups to large tech companies that are thinking that governments just don't get it. And there are also governments that are deeply suspicious, probably especially about large tech companies, to say, well, they're potentially the enemy. Maybe we do this against them. So our thesis from the beginning, we are a little over 1.5 years old, has been that we need a global multi-stakeholder effort. Multi-stakeholder, as in we hope that companies that are interested in this space are going to work together with governments and countries that are interested in this space. And global, because we don't want us and our kids to lose an ability we all take for granted today. If you have a physical driver's license, you can take that physical driver's license anywhere in the world, rent a car, and if you're speeding and stopped by the police, you can show it to a policeman. There is a real danger that we're going to lose that in the future because we have competing and different standards. So this is a sneak peek of where we're going to go. What you see here on the right is what we launched at the end of February, 1.5 years ago. The OpenWallet Foundation is legally part of the Linux Foundation, like CNCF, like PyTorch, for instance. You probably know that. I think the most recent count is that there are almost 950 sub-foundations now in the Linux Foundation. 2,000 members, over 900,000 contributors. I assume most of you are very familiar with the Linux Foundation. What's important is that the OpenWallet Foundation is designed to be a space for developers to come together and work on code. And it is not going to be working on standards or on wallets themselves. So some people say, well, if you don't work on standards and if you just work on wallets, what are you even doing? And again, we think that browser world is an interesting analogy. If you're using Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge or the Samsung Internet browser or Opera, you're using Blink, part of the Chromium project. But when you think about it, Blink is not a standard. It is based on top of a lot of standards. Google told me over 700 standards factor into modern browser software. So you have 700 standards, and then you have browsers like Google Chrome or the Samsung Internet browser. But above the standards and below the actual browser, you have these open source components. And that's really what the OpenWallet Foundation is focusing on. The thing that is new is what you see here on the left. And before I tell you about the OpenWallet Forum, let me tell you why we're even doing this. We launched the OpenWallet Foundation as the first Linux Foundation project with a governmental advisory council. Some of you may be familiar with the term GAC, or Governmental Advisory Council, because it's what ICANN calls their body that allows governments to have a seat at the table. And 12 countries, a dozen countries, took us up on the offer to join that Governmental Advisory Council in the first year. The first was the Kingdom of Bhutan, admittedly a small country, but actually quite an innovative country when it comes to decentralized identity. The second was a slightly larger kingdom, the United Kingdom. And in the meantime, a lot of countries have joined, all the way to China and the United States. But we've also seen countries that are deeply skeptical about joining a private organization. This is not a knock on the Linux Foundation, nothing against the Linux Foundation. There are just governments that say, we're not in the business of joining a private club. And so last Christmas, we thought about what can we do to make it easier for more governments to join. Because the goal really is to have 193 governments at the table, every UN member state. And then we thought, well, you're probably, most of you are coming from the private sector. You're using organizations like the Linux Foundation or the Eclipse Foundation or the Apache Software Foundation. What are countries using to work together? Well, the closest equivalent is probably the United Nations itself. And so we thought, what if we talk to the United Nations and we say, would you like to play a role in bringing all the countries together, as we are, the Linux Foundation, really successful in bringing all the companies together? And when we started with that, a lot of people were deeply skeptical. I remember a good friend of mine at the Linux Foundation who said, you're going to waste 5 years of your life on this, and in the end, the United Nations will tell you, go to hell. And within 3 months from the first conversation, 3 months, we got a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations. And we're going to launch this, as I said at the beginning, on October 1st at the Digital Public Infrastructure Summit in Cairo. So I really think the UN gets not enough credit. They are probably a little bit bureaucratic. They are obviously a huge organization. But we've been incredibly fortunate to find people at the United Nations who are deeply passionate about wallets and see the crucial value that wallets are playing in the future. So what are we going to launch on October the 1st? We call it the OpenWallet Forum. It will be hosted at the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, the only tech-focused UN specialized agency. And what they'll really do is they will send out the Zoom invites in the future. So they are inviting 193 members plus the European Union to join the OpenWallet Foundation. This week, 194 letters are going out, basically inviting countries to join these important conversations. And what it is trying to do is, just like the OpenWallet Foundation is aiming to create a safe space for developers where they can work together without worrying too much about IPR or antitrust. This is really designed to be a safe place for governments to come together, not to create standards, but to discuss which standards are you using, why are you using these standards, why are we using a different standard, is there anything we can do to be interoperable in the future? But the idea is not to make policy decisions or to create new standards. We're not going to compete with SDOs, with standard development organizations, really to have a global forum basically for these discussions. Now, if OpenWallet was a horse carriage and the OpenWallet Forum is one horse and the OpenWallet Foundation is another horse, first, it's really important to ensure that horses are not running in different directions. That would be really bad for the carriage. So what we're trying to do is to align the forum and the foundation as closely as possible. And we'll do that with a couple of things. It will start with a meeting in January at the World Economic Forum, where we will have what is called at the moment the high-level meeting. And the idea is that the Swiss government and the Secretary General of the ITU are going to invite senior decision makers, both on the side of the foundation and the side of the forum, to come together and agree on strategic questions. And the idea for the first high-level meeting is to agree on something that is really a very low bar, namely that global interoperability is a goal worth having. Not on a timeline, not on particular standards. Very few ministers, I think, will want to discuss that. But our hope is that at the very least, we can say that global interoperability is something we want to work towards, that it's an important goal to have. And we'll also have a conference in Geneva, most likely on July 1st and 2nd. And the idea is to bring as many countries and companies together to discuss how we can do that, how we can bring different countries, different use cases, different industries together and worry about interoperable, secure and privacy-preserving wallets. And we also announced another activity that the Forum and the Foundation are going to cooperate on, and that's a shared code repository. You know, when you think about a global infrastructure for digital wallets, one question that pops up is under which country's jurisdiction should that code be? Which is an important question because this country can block access to a code repository to other countries single-handedly. Whatever country you pick, if you host your code there, that country can decide which other countries can have access to that repository or not. And that might be okay in some instances, but if it's really critical digital public infrastructure, we believe that it is very important that no one country can block access to this code for other countries. We think it's okay if the United Nations, if a majority of countries decide that one country should be blocked, no one country should have the ability to block access to this code to the rest of the world. And so we're really happy that UNICC, the United Nations International Computing Center, is going to host a mirror of the OpenWallet GitHub. There is going to be a local GitLab under international jurisdiction. Any developer from any country in the world will be able to access that under the protection of the United Nations, unless the UN itself is putting a country under sanctions. Then it's the UN. Then it's basically the society that hopefully represents mankind, and it's not any one country making that decision. This is a very quick overview of what I just told you about the calendar. And again, this is still work in progress. We are going to announce this on October the 1st, so take it with a grain of salt. But you see here that there's quite a lot planned for next year. We will have regular meetings of the GCC, the Governmental Coordination Committee, which is basically the group of governments meeting with other governments. And there will be cadence of monthly meetings that the GCC will have, with 2 in-person meetings at the World Economic Forum and in Geneva. You have the GB meetings, the governing board meetings at the OpenWallet Foundation, and then the governing board and the GCC will have quarterly meetings basically where they talk to each other to ensure that the public sector and the private sector hopefully stay in sync. You'll also see that we will have more member meetings as of next year. Of course, we have actually tech meetings that happen every 2 weeks. That's the Technical Advisory Council of the OpenWallet Foundation. We will have monthly developer meetings where we are highlighting the code projects at OpenWallet in order to encourage 2 things. One, that developers that are not working on any of these projects are potentially interested to join one of these projects, as well as existing code projects working together. I jokingly said that OpenWallet is a little bit like Tinder for developers. You know, the idea is that you have an opportunity to meet other developers working on projects, and we will never attempt to force any projects to work together. But if there are half a dozen SDJ projects, we'll introduce them to each other, and maybe they find that it is better to cooperate than to work in splendid isolation. And then in the last line, you see a couple of conferences that we're going to be at. I'm starting to get gray hair because of all the conferences, but it is a really nice opportunity to meet in person. So we'll also try to learn at what conferences we should be in order to get opportunities to speak with developers. The Global Open Wallet Summit, this is a very early idea. Again, take it with a grain of salt, but this is what we're trying to do. The idea is to bring together governments and companies to talk about all the aspects of digital wallets. from identity to assets to the applications itself to the standards and the different credential formats, and then honing in on use cases. We're having really great conversations with the World Health Organization and UNDP. They're going to join as observers, the Governmental Coordination Committee. And we really think we have an interesting opportunity to create a big event where people meet that don't typically meet at other conferences. That's at least the goal. Day two, the idea is that this is going to be completely unstructured. I don't know if you know about IIW or if you've been to the DICE conference, the Digital Identity Unconference Europe. The idea is to do something actually with the same team that is very much like that. So anyone on day two can call these sessions and you can say, I want to talk about something that I'm passionate about. And then, people will vote with their feet. We don't decide what the keynote is. It's basically the community that decides what the program is and where they want to go. As far as code projects are concerned, we were a very unusual Linux Foundation project because a typical LF project starts with code, right? There is a company, whether it's a small one or a very large one, and they have code and they want to work with other companies on that, and then they work with DLF or with other foundations. And we were not like that. We did not start with code. We just started with this idea of bringing everyone together. And to be honest, I had nightmares. We would be the only Linux Foundation project without open source code, which is a really bad thing, to be an open source organization without open source code. We're very lucky that we've actually had 15 code projects the day before yesterday. At the TAC yesterday, more projects were accepted. And we believe that we will likely end the year with 25 code projects. Some are very small, couple of developers. Some are very large. We are really excited about the future. Hopefully, the future of OpenWallet is not to go from 25 code projects to 2,500 code projects not working with each other, but maybe to work towards a future where we have a few code projects that actually a lot of developers are excited about to work together on. I don't have enough time because I would really like to give time for questions. I encourage you to go to the OpenWallet website and look at the projects that are there. And obviously, this is the heart of the OpenWallet Foundation. So if you are working on code projects that are related to wallets, you're looking for a space to work with other folks that are interested in software for digital wallets, please consider the OpenWallet Foundation as a potential home. Yeah, this is a little salesy, so I don't want this to become a sales thing, but obviously, we're very much like another Linux Foundation project. So we have general members and we have premier members. We try to do this in the best possible way. We are really interested in feedback. At the moment, for instance, our premier members get a seat on the Technical Advisory Council because, as I said, we didn't have any code projects, so we really needed people on the TAC. We are constantly trying to think through how we can create the best possible structure for members as well as for developers. So, in a nutshell, this is the OpenWallet Foundation, and this is the OpenWallet Forum. It's an experiment. I think it's the first time that the United Nations partnered with the Linux Foundation or any comparable organization. By the way, the email addresses on the left are not yet working, so and the .org is not working either at the moment, but this is going to work on October the 1st. Info@openwallet.foundation does work. That's what we've been using for the past almost 2 years. It's an experiment. And I believe it's an important step because the vision and the mission and problem, frankly, is huge. If we want to create wallets that work a little like browsers, in that there is no Chinese browser or no Philippine browser. You can basically go to any website anywhere in the world and you use global browser. And if you use that browser, you don't care whether you look at a JPEG or a TIFF or a PNG or any other, common format. The browser is going to abstract all of that complexity away. If we want to get to wallets that work like this, I think we have a long way to go. So the good news is I see a lot of people who are much younger than me here. I think there is a lot of work to do for the next decades to come. But I think it will really require ruthless cooperation. With that said, I think we have another 7 minutes, and this should not be a YouTube video, but really interactive. I hope you might have questions. You've looked very skeptical the entire time. I'm not sure if you have a question. You would be really welcome to ask.
I work for a consulting IT company. I'm thinking about how fast I get wallet one day.
Oh, thank you.
Something
That's incredibly kind.
special.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Please.
Yes, I have a question. If you try to anticipate the future, let's say in 2, 3, or 4 years, how many wallets will a typical person have on his mobile phone? And how is the competition between such a wallet with this Apple wallet or whatever, these big companies which probably wants to have their one and only wallet?
I think it's a really important question. And I don't have an answer. I think there are a couple of possible futures. There is one future, which is that we are by each other's throat. We basically have large tech companies, Apple, Google, Samsung, doing their thing, and we have large public infrastructure programs doing their own thing. And I think the reason why this is a possibility is this innate skepticism. If I'm a public sector government representative, maybe I view tech companies skeptically, and maybe large tech companies that are probably thousands of kilometers away, headquartered, I probably view them as the competition. And the same is true, I've been to a meeting where a very large tech company told a pretty large European government, um, here's the credential format, here's the code, here are the standards, just do as we tell you, and everyone is going to be fine. And we know best. Just don't try to come up with your own ideas, because whatever you come up with, it's worse than what we know already. Because we know our hardware, our operating system better than anyone else in the world. Don't even try. And probably it's not surprising that this meeting did not go particularly well with the government officials who said, actually, we do care and we have our own opinions, and we don't want to be completely dependable on your solutions. The reason why I hope for a different future is because I think both sides, and in the end, all of us, are going to lose if large tech companies, innovative startups, and governments cannot agree to work together. So I'm hoping for a plurality of wallets, and I'm hoping for a world where it's almost irrelevant, because these wallets will play so well together that it doesn't really matter how many wallets you have. But I think we're a long ways off from, a guaranteed outcome that would look anything like that. I think you were first, and then I've seen.
Is that you were afraid that the Wallet Foundation could become the first Linux Foundation project that could potentially be the uh, not open source project? Why do you think that could potentially be the case?
The fear was not that it would not be open source, that we would go to proprietary software, but the fear was that we wouldn't have any code at all, because we started without code. So, like when you think about Kubernetes, or when you think about, so many other open source projects, it's really the company that has code and decides that for whatever reason they want to work with others on that code, and then they put that code in a foundation, and then basically, others join. For us, it was really the opposite. We said it is vital for developers to come together and work on wallets. But we didn't have any developers. We just had this idea. And I thought, I think potentially there could have been a future where no developer was interested in, contributing code to OpenWallet. And then we would have been really the first open source foundation without open source code, and we would have had a lot of egg on our face. So we've been incredibly privileged that a lot of developers already contributed code, and we have a really full pipeline of code contributions. And I'm also really stoked that some of those contributions come from individual developers. Some of them come from large communities like Macapie, which I'm not sure we announced yet, but stay tuned for that. And so there is a lot happening. And Google contributed code that the European Commission is now using in the EUDI reference code. So I think the flywheel is starting to turn, and I'm really excited for where this might go. I think you were next.
Should I use the microphone? Thanks for the presentation.
For the internet.
For the internet, okay. I found it really interesting that you were mentioning standards and the problem of so many different standards. And then you were like explaining, okay, we more focus on talking to each other, having the code base and so on. This is kind of the bottom-up approach where you say, okay, we want to develop, and then afterwards see which of the standards will fit best, or how do you see this going forward?
So the answer might surprise you, because when I think about standards and code, I think about a train. If you are in Geneva and if you like a nice view, I encourage you to use the Golden Pass train. It starts in Geneva and it goes to the Alps. For many, many decades, I think almost for 100 years, people boarded the train in Geneva, then they got off mid-journey, and then they took another train to finish to the mountains. Why? Because the gauge, from normal gauge to narrow gauge. And so when you take that train today, actually you don't have to get off, because the train is so clever that it can adapt to different gauges. Now, the reason why I'm boring you with train stories is just like the physical rails change, the payment rails, the identity rails change from one country to another and from one use case to another. So I think our wallets need to function like that train. In an ideal world, maybe all the train tracks would be the same everywhere in the world. But sometimes one ministry has two different ideas in terms of credential formats or protocols. And so I think for a very long time, we will not live in a world where we have common standards, common rails, but we should have wallets that can adapt to whatever rails they face. I think we are at the end of our time. Thank you again so much for the invitation. It's been a real pleasure to present. And if you have any question, please find me on LinkedIn or send me an email, daniel@openwallet.foundation. I have to be for 2 panels at the Linux Foundation Member Summit later today, but I would really hope to hear from you. And I'm excited about Keycloak and what you're doing. I think it's a really interesting project. Thank you again.